The opinions expressed on the following audio program are solely those of the host and the guests. Burner Podcast is an independently produced, not-for-profit show and is not associated with the Burning Man organization or its subsidiaries. The views expressed are not representative of the entire Burning Man community and are presented here for entertainment purposes only. In short, calm the fuck down. It's just a podcast.
All right, it's episode number 75, and it is 207 days till the man burns as of this recording. Hey, shout out to Eric Jones in Arizona. I keep referring to Arizona, but it's the city. Eric, it was a pleasure meeting you as well, as brief as it was, and thank you for letting us know that you have chosen to waste away hours of your life binge listening to previous episodes of the show. And we are also very much looking forward to seeing you in the dust. Playa Dust. Not Arizona Dust. Is Arizona Dusty? Or is that just a movie thing? I don't know. In other Burner Podcast family news, this past week, we had our second Alkaline Sessions Friday happy hour event. If you find yourself in the San Diego area on a first Friday of the month, make your way over to Blonde Bar, where our whole team will be hanging out and a fabulous DJ active indie Burning Man community will be behind the decks, along with our very own Navjeet Sarna, the producer and host of Alkaline Podcast. It's a great way to meet and greet with other burners and house music heads. And you can always stay abreast of, I like that word, of events and stuff by following Burner Podcast and joining the Burner Podcast group on Facebook. So on last week's episode, I was telling you guys about having just spent the weekend in the quirky little town of Joshua Tree in Southern California, along with producer Rebel. And, well, we did actually have like a mission to be out there. I mean, you know, in addition to hanging out by the fire and telling stories till 3 a.m, we did actually have a purpose. We went there for a reason. I went out to Joshua Tree to link up with the extremely handsome Mr. Christopher Breedlove, the program manager of Burners Without Borders, so that we could bring you today's interview. Breedlove, which, by the way, I think that's his actual name, which is like really fucking cool, out of the box, ready playa name, right? Breedlove was also my camp lead at this past year's burn, since I got the pleasure of camping with BWB on Playa. BWB is a tough one to say, by the way. It feels like a little bit of a tongue twister. Right on the freaking Esplanade. And, you know, like people always go, oh my God, Esplanade would be too crazy. And I can tell you I slept like a fucking baby. A dusty, mildly dehydrated, heart chakra wide open little baby. Anyways, when people think of Burners Without Borders, they generally seem to focus a lot on their build efforts. It seems to be a big chunk of what people immediately think Burners Without Borders does. And it's a perception has existed to some or to many that they're like a hippie version of Habitat for Humanity. And that may stem from the sticky and ever so shareable story of their roots as a spontaneous post-Hurricane Katrina burner building force in the Gulf. I'm sure you've heard the tale of how a group of builders headed straight from Black Rock to the eye of the devastation to help rebuild a destroyed Vietnamese temple in Biloxi, I think it's pronounced. Today's interview will recount that adventure, no doubt. The following conversation, however, will help us learn more about how BWB does so much more than build infrastructure. As always, we'll begin by getting to know Breedlove himself a bit. Dude's had some serious adventures, let me tell you. He is an artist and filmmaker himself. And you'll get to know his story, as we always do. But I discovered that a most endearing quality about Breedlove is that he really gets more vocal and hyped and excited when he's telling you stories about the programs they're working on, as opposed to just about himself. He's more comfortable telling you about all the cool shit burners are doing in the world. We will follow his story as he learns and gets involved with BWB in Chicago by throwing salons. like the conversation kind, not the place where you cut your hair. And then we'll get into some of the kind of like the structure of BWB operations. We'll get into some of that geekery. We'll chat about all the ways that this community is sparking positive change in the world and learn of just some of the amazing international projects that Burners Without Borders is funding and facilitating at this very moment. As you sit there or ride in your car or do whatever it is you're doing when you're listening to this, hopefully, I don't know, heavy machinery? I guess you can listen. It's not like this is like hypnotizing or anything. Anyway, look up burnerswithoutborders.org for more information if you want to follow along. And after the chat, do stay tuned for a fun and funky closing set by the Chicago native deck wrecker, GoodSex. Pretty much the best DJ name I've ever heard. You'll be hearing an hour of a set that was recorded on SolarBeatz, the fun and funky, environmentally sustainable art car, which also, like me, called Burners Without Borders Camp home. There is a fun little story about the set, which I'll tell you later. But for now, let's just go ahead and shoot the shit with Christopher Breedlove. Today's episode is entitled To Build a Better Tomorrow. By the way, we recorded this chat in a 1940s motel room, which is currently going through refurbishing to become an artist space because, reasons. I go by Mr. Arash, even though nobody calls me Mr. Welcome to Burner Podcast.
On the first part of the journey, I was looking at all the life. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There were sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was a fly with the bugs and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, because there ain't no one for to give you no name.
I've never been able to kind of wrap my brain around how you can just kind of like look at what material you have in front of you and start putting it together and go like, this will look cool. And I wonder like how do you feel about that? Do you, I mean, you're a builder, you're a craftsman.
Sure, yeah. I'm an artist and a designer and a builder and stuff. Well, I think there's multiple ways, I guess, to do stuff. Like sometimes I think the mission or the meaning is the directive, but I mean, there's also that experience, right, of just having a bunch of stuff and kind of going into a flow state and making something.
Do you have like a way to trigger that flow state for yourself? Because that's the key word that I was looking for.
Sure. I mean, is there... No, there's not like a surefire way, but I think there's definitely kind of like things you can do to maybe gear yourself up to get into it more easily. Yeah. I think a lot of people choose different type of practices or rituals to kind of like help them get into the zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had to look at that process, like what is your favorite part of it? Like what is the thing that you're always like most looking forward to? I can tell you like an example is like for me, this thing, for example, like the podcast, or I'm a photographer. Like for me, it's ultimately finding whatever like an essence of one individual person is. And all the rest of the stuff that I do is kind of stuff that builds around it. Like if we do a roundtable episode, those are just kind of fun, right? Or if I shoot like an architectural thing, that I might be doing that for a paycheck. But sitting down with one person and really connecting with their essence, like that's the thing that excites me the most about the creative process. And I wonder, like, when you're going through the process of building something, is that something you've ever thought about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's generally some themes to what I do, and for me, it's really kind of about the intersection of like people, technology, and art, and like how do those things go together? And so to me, those are the exciting spaces. And to me too, I think that it's kind of the artist's job to maybe introduce ideas to people in a safe way for the first time. And so that's why I think technology is a really fun thing to be playing with.
What sorts of technology?
Well, I just think, I mean, so some of what I'm doing is community organizing too, right? But there's just all of these ways now to start to connect people. And there's like rituals or there's kind of like systems you can build between people. And I think that's what a lot of people are experimenting with in art projects and theme camps and stuff like that, which is kind of like, what is the art of bringing people together and building collective vision?
Do you have an earliest memory of the first time that you felt the excitement of wanting to create something? And it could be anything, any sort of media.
I mean, I guess I don't know how to separate my existence from creation, you know? I think that that's probably my main driving force. If I'm not making something, I get super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like children, I mean, I'm going back all the way back to like childhood, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like as a child, like the instant you start to figure out how to move your limbs, any human being, like the first thing that human beings want to do as soon as they start moving their limbs is they want to create something. They want to draw, they want to paint, and then kind of society little by little beats that out of you. You know, as you grow older, you're told to like sit straight, go to class, you know, do your math homework. And little by little that, you know, that kind of like this thing that seems to be the most instinctive thing that we're almost, you know, we come out of the womb with kind of starts to get chipped away.
Well, I think that the play is a really important part of that, and that play and experimentation and creation all have an interesting kind of starting point that's together. And I think maybe that's what's taken out of you is the ability to play in the same sort of way.
Yeah.
Because to me, I think play is where innovation happens anyways. I think there's a lot of research that supports that. When people are thinking freely and just having fun, you stumble on to the most interesting things.
Right. So you had some sort of an upbringing where that was never chipped out of you. You continued to play and create.
Yeah, well, I think that, I guess I was lucky. I lived near people and had parents who were, like, I guess, supportive of experimentation.
Yeah. Where did you grow up? Tell me about your parents.
Yeah, well, I grew up, I was born in California, and then we moved out to Minnesota, and I went to most of school out there.
Mm-hmm. The what school?
I went to school out there, yeah. And my dad was a JAG military lawyer, and then still a lawyer, and my mom is also, I guess, kind of an experimenter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Experimenter in what way?
She just has always done a lot of interesting things. She's had a lot of different jobs in media and stuff, and she got really into Pilates when that was new and was like one of those people who was like pushing that as like a movement. So.
I tried Pilates for a little while. There's a lot of thinking. It's like I'm constantly trying to figure out how to work this piece of equipment.
It's not really relaxing, I don't think. Yeah.
Yoga worked out better.
I like yoga, yeah.
I wouldn't have expected necessarily military father. Was he, like, in order to be a JAG lawyer, or do you have the military background, or are you an attorney that just gets into that work?
No, yeah, you're an officer in the military. It's like what you do.
Yeah.
So,
were you creating art when you were a child, when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, it's always been a part of me. I've been playing with video and photography and sculpture. Yeah. It's just who I am. Like I said, that's how I feel most comfortable, I think, in the world, is playing through art.
Right. And you said your parents were pretty supportive of it.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't non-supportive of it, you know? I think they saw that I had some talent in it, and so they were encouraging of that.
Yeah, you're not setting anything on fire at that age, I guess. Later on, the fire.
Well, we were still setting stuff on fire, as kids do.
Yeah. When we were, because, you know, full disclosure, I talked about a couple of times on the show how I camped with BWB this year on Playa, and you were a camp lead. And at some point, you were telling me a story about living on a bus for a while and going on some of the adventures. Like, I'm trying to remember some of the story, but I remember hearing the story as you were telling me this. I don't remember the details of it, and I'd love to hear it now too. But hearing some of that story and going like, wow, like this dude is like very free as a fucking bird. Like, I'm just gonna go on this random adventure and do a thing. I remember hearing the story and thinking, I don't know if I have that thing to be able to go on that level of adventure that you were doing at that time. And I remember at that time feeling like, oh, okay, you must come like from a lineage of, you know, parents that were extra supportive of like breaking the rules and going out on adventures. But it's interesting that your dad was a military guy, and
Well, I mean, like in very general terms, my dad is much more strict and my mom is much more loose. Right. And I think that's given me a good framework to work in between both of those things.
Right.
But the story you were talking about, right, was when I went on a gypsy bus.
Yeah.
Where when I was 19, I was taking a class for school about writing film treatments, and I found
this film major.
Yeah, I went to school for film and video, and so I wrote a paper about these people who I met on an online forum, and like after I had done the paper, they invited me to go along with them, and so it was a group of people. I would say at most, I think we had 14 people, 2 kids and a dog, and then at some points it was like 3. But it was these people from Canada who built these buses and had experimental communities that they picked people up along the way, and were trying to kind of construct a social dynamic inside of it. And so no one had their own money. All the money was held by the treasurer. You had to make like jewelry or make other items to sell. And so it was trying to be this kind of model. I don't know if it worked very well. But, I spent 3 months with them where I got a camera and I convinced my friend from high school to join me. And we attempted to make a film about this, where we went from Colorado down into Mexico and then up the coast of California.
Yeah. Like a documentary.
Yeah.
So everybody on the bus was supportive of this documentary being made?
Yeah, they had illusions of grandeur. They thought like this was their ticket to fame. I have some really interesting late night video of everyone talking about what they're going to do with the sweet cash. So.
It's interesting because it almost sounds like a little bit, I don't know, on the edge of anarchist thinking, but then at the same time they're kind of like banding together and like looking at business and...
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of all of that, and I think that's one of the things I've always been interested in is how communities come together, why people organize, how people organize, and what they're able to produce from that. And so for me, this was very much a journey in kind of looking at that from one perspective. Yeah.
What attracted you to filmmaking? Was it more the storytelling aspect of it or the technical aspect?
Sure, narrative. Yeah. I think narratives are probably one of the most powerful tools that humans have. I don't know how many times I've changed my mind because of a fact or an opinion, but a story makes me contextualize who I am in a narrative. And so, I don't know, I think it broadens how people think about themselves in the world.
After that. Yeah. Because I can tell you this, like, I have met my share of like filmmakers who like get into it, and directing, for example, being able to like direct multiple people that are doing different things, and you're looking to tell that story. But it's totally an easily transitionable skill set into something else. So I mean, we're gonna soon get to the work that you're doing with BWB, but it almost sounds like you were kind of training that skill set from an early time. You're working from an artistic angle, but putting together the story and connecting with multiple different personalities and finding a way to bring them together and link that stories together.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that it was a unique way of working, I guess, but I've always been super collaborative, and I think that's one of the things that made me interested in film and why I made movies and videos with my friends when I was a kid, because it was like all of us coming together to try and create some common vision, and it's like the sum of all of our parts created this greater whole.
Yeah. What'd you do after film school?
When I was in film school, I discovered Burning Man, and I got very involved with my local community in Chicago.
Yeah. So that was like when you were 20, 21?
Yeah, right in there.
That's early.
Yeah, I mean, it's a much longer story, but, of all happenstance, like as soon as I moved to Chicago, there was this fundraiser for a theme camp called Entheon Village, and Alex Gray was going to be there, and I didn't know what a theme camp was. I didn't even really know who Alex Gray was. I just knew he made the art on the Tool album covers at that point. But I went to this amazing warehouse party, like when I'd first moved there, and it really blew my mind, just the level of production and everything they were doing, and it ended up being for this theme camp, Entheon Village, that had brought Alex Gray out to Burning Man and stuff. So
it was like the art production that caught your attention.
Yeah, well, and also the scale, and that there was something interesting happening there, that when I'd gone to other events, they didn't seem as dynamic. Yeah. And I guess that's what I like about Burning Man esque things in general is there's more than one thing to do.
Yeah.
There's people doing art, there's people doing music, there's people dancing, there's people doing workshops, and so you have that variety of a feeling, which is really powerful.
How old were you at your first burn?
I was 19.
19. Wow.
Yeah.
You're not old enough to drink it.
No, not at all. And I ended up there without really knowing a lot about it.
Yeah.
Which was interesting because I came in.
Did you go with that theme camp at the Village?
No, I didn't, because I had gone to their event, and then I went on this gypsy trip, and then I wound up at Burning Man, and I found those people who had thrown that fundraiser while I was at Burning Man. I wandered into this camp, and I thought it was really beautiful, and then all of a sudden I started to see these people, and that's how I got connected into the Chicago community.
Who did you roll to your first Burning Man with?
This guy from the Gypsy Bus, Darren, and it was his favorite thing in the world, and he wanted to give me a gift because I had helped him through some experiences on that.
He shepherded you to the experience.
Yes, questionably well.
Yeah.
We skipped a lot of essential facts, and so my first burn was maybe a little rough. I wasn't very prepared, but
in what way? Tell that story.
Oh, I mean,
tell about your arrival on Playa. Did you get there in opening when the gate was open? Were you guys early entry?
We went in. No, we went in during the event. It's a super long story.
We got time. do the shortened version.
Yeah, well, I mean, just, this was back when you could get a ticket at the gate, and so I didn't even know I needed a ticket until we were, on the road, and it was more important for Darren to show me how to spin fire than it was for him to teach me much about what was going to happen.
Priorities.
Yeah, priorities. Everyone's got different ones.
Yeah.
And so, it was a very interesting first burn, and for me, it was very lucky finding that theme camp at the Village, because they were what drew me back into the experience. 100%, yeah. Because
you went out there. How big was that camp? Do you know about how many people are camping with them?
At that point, I don't know. I mean, I would guess it was a couple hundred.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there anything that's was there anything that really surprised you when you got out there? Because it sounds like you had some frame of reference for this being a larger production thing.
Well, I mean, the whole thing shocked me, you know? I mean, the fact that it had civic infrastructure, the scale of it, obviously, the art, I hadn't even seen that many photos. It was 2006, and so I don't feel like there was many opportunities to see that stuff. There was, but social media wasn't really a thing yet. To me it was the scale of it, and like I said, that camp was doing some really beautiful things and was trying to bring community together in some really interesting ways, and so all of that, the beauty plus the social experimentation,
I know you felt head first into the thing pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
Did you continue going every year since then?
I took a year off in 2008, but other than that, I've been going every year.
So did you have a thing where, because a lot of times people go their first burn, and when it takes over your energy, you're like, I'm going to come back next year with this. What happened in that following year? How did your introduction to the culture and the community change the way that, you're moving through your life direction and you're planning the next few years?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously I all of a sudden had way less time, because I started getting involved with all sorts of things. And so, I came back, and that's when I started talking to my local group, and then I started getting involved with the decompression. And, for me, the Chicago community that I lived in for 10 years was a huge catalyst for growth, because, they have some really interesting things going on. They have multiple warehouses that are all working together, and we have studios in those spaces, which include a metal shop and a wood shop and a dance studio and a professional recording studio and a professional kitchen and a sewing operative and laser cutters. I mean, everything is in these spaces, and so I started really falling into that world and organizing events and organizing projects.
Right. When I started to discover the San Diego community, as a photographer, and I was doing film and video at that time as well. I still do, but it was funny. My first feeling though was, I have no idea what to contribute, because everybody here is building shit on this epic scale, and they know how to use power tools and all this stuff. And I was like, I have no idea. Like, do I come and take pictures? Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
I wonder, like, you were coming from that film and video background too. Like, what was your feeling? Like, what was the first things you got involved in contributing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did video production, but I just show up and help build stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I like puzzles, and building stuff is a puzzle to me. And so, you know, I would just show up early and build domes and do all those things that later on I ended up gathering a whole lot of skills that I probably never had before. Like, you know, simple stuff like how to use a ratchet strap or how to drive a manual vehicle, you know, into super complicated tasks, you know, like how to rig things, or use heavy equipment.
So you didn't have that kind of like build background prior to your discovery of Burning Man community?
No. I mean, you know, I built like, what do you call that? A soapbox derby for Boy Scouts, but I think that's like the most I'd ever built before that.
The most I built was Legos.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at least you hammered a nail.
Legos is pretty good, though. You can do some amazing things.
Yeah. I never follow the directions.
What's the best thing you ever built?
I would, like, build, like, a city. Because this is, like, when I was little, I was in Iran, and, like, my dad would come back with, like, a new set of Legos every time he'd visit the U.S.
No.
And I would, like, build, like, a city, and then I'd Godzilla it.
Yeah. Like,
plow through and break everything down.
That seems to be a common thing to do once you build a city.
Yeah. To break it apart. That's really fascinating. I mean, like, I feel like that's like a super important point to like point out, like the fact that here you are now at such a visible position in the Burners Without Borders movement, and yeah, like jumping all the way back, like you didn't come with like heavy build experience kind of thing. Like a lot of the stuff you learned after you kind of came into the community. You got your schooling like on the job. I
did get a lot of it on the job, and I mean, I think one of the things I'm good with is people and narrative, you know, and I do think that's been like a really common thing that's guided me along the way, you know, and like in my time in Chicago, you know, I got involved and helped start the what do you call it, regional burn Lakes of Fire. I was on the team that started that, and I was like the original volunteer coordinator. You know, I became a regional contact for Chicago. I was part of the process of turning what we were doing as a bunch of burners into a non-for-profit. You know, and like I would kind of like play these roles for a couple of years and learn a bunch of things. But like, you know, for me, it's really about, I'm super interested about how do we create these containers for people to feel safe and for people to experiment with, because it's been so good for me. You know, I have a lot of belief in kind of the general organizing principles.
Yeah. Because like a lot of what I'm hearing from your descriptions of like the kinds of work that you're doing and the way that you learned it is interesting. Like you, and I don't know if this is innate, or I wonder if you have a frame of reference for where this may have entered your consciousness, but you're able to like take a step back and see like the big picture, but then you also seem to very easily kind of zoom into the macro thing that's right. Is it macro or micro? The small thing that's like right in front of you.
Sure.
Which, and the small thing that's right in front of you is something as simple as like, I'm going to hammer this nail in. And I feel like a lot of people, we're generalizing dramatically here, but a lot of people will find it easier to kind of do more one or the other.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like you can kind of see like the big vision thing, or you're good at doing like, I'm going to go head first into this geeky focused kind of thing. And you're kind of able to casually do both.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wonder if I can go as deep into either end of it because I can do both, but I do think that is a large part of my success as a producer of a whole bunch of things, is that I'm pretty good at the overall picture, but then I understand enough how to dive down into the details, and I think that was like what I did with film, you know. That's why I was interested in directing and producing. It's thinking on those levels. And you know, a lot of the skills I also learned from art was just working with other artists. And, you know, I think when you talk about the narrative thing, like one of the skills I can bring to a lot of artists is help them tell their narrative. Right. And then I'm also good at building the thing. And so I got a lot of really interesting opportunities along the way to join teams and like learn how to build large things or weld or whatever, because I also happen to be really good at telling this narrative. Like, I just, one of my favorite experiences was in 2011. Dave X, who runs fire safety for Burning Man, he had done this flame effects workshop, And me and two of my friends, Bebop and JB, we had gone, and they were building these big wheel bikes out of custom steel bent frames and making big wheels for adults. And so Dave saw these. He thought they were awesome. Dave has done work with this really interesting community in Taiwan called the Dream Community that a couple years ago built a lotus temple at Burning Man that was super beautiful. Yeah. And they offered our team to come out and build 3-pedal powered parade floats for them out of scrap bicycles and metal. And so, like, my job on the team was that, like, I could both help these guys catalog the story and do all of that kind of, like, narrative production, and then at the same time I could weld. And so I got to learn so much on that trip. I spent 3 months there, and we were, like, hitting some really hard challenges. Like, we had this double bike that had 2 bikes on either side and was, like, 15, 16 feet long, and we didn't know how to make the 2 front tires steer at the same time. And I mean, thank God for the internet, but you're able to go on there and look it up, and we found out it's called Ackerman steering, and then we were able to kind of, like, engineer all of that.
Yeah.
On the job. I don't know. And so that was a really amazing experience. But
I wonder, just even like what you're describing, like I wonder if it's like a similar situation, and what your thought on this, because you're learning to weld, and you're doing the work, but then you're also documenting it and shooting it. It almost makes me think of, like, when I was drawing at a younger age, and when I started to actually, like, work out and learn where the muscle structures fell, I was able to draw the body better. I wonder if, like, that affected the way that you do that kind of visual storytelling.
I can tell the story.
Yeah, in a different way because you've got your hands in the welding. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's I'm really close to the narrative, and so that gives me an interesting perspective. I really like being in the field of whatever I'm doing. To me, I have a really hard time. As a media person, it was super hard for me to just observe, and so that, I think, really marks, like, what I was getting really good at in that world, was to, like, be able to participate and document and do that at the same time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I know for me I didn't have a whole lot of choice because I'm 6'5" and brown, so I can never just be like a fly on the wall. But it's interesting to have that experience where, like, you find that the more you get in there, like, you get your hands dirty, you almost get, like, some of the better stuff. But then there's other filmmakers and photographers that have the opposite experience. They're able to do the fly on the wall thing a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I don't know. It's like getting my hands dirty is I think, part of the magic of how I end up in these places. So, yeah.
Well, Burners Without Borders, obviously, like, at what point did you start to get involved with that movement?
Yeah, well, I guess I found the Burners Without Borders camp my second year at Burning Man in 2007.
So you're 20?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in large part, thanks to a guy I had met in Chicago at that time named Tom Laporte, who is a longtime BWB member and the Regional Network and Media Mecca. And so I found them, and they were just, I felt like they were my people. They were just, like, I loved them. They were super interesting and super capable, and they were still riding very high off of the whole Katrina experience that had happened 2 years ago. And so they were very interesting. And so when I went back to Chicago, I started throwing salons at home. And so I would just have people come over to my house once a month and do a potluck and kind of talk about this whole idea of Burners Without Borders, which is, bringing the Burning Man principles into the world in collaborative, creative, social impact ways. And so that's where it started for me. And, like, a whole bunch of years later, I'm like, it is my job that I'm doing right now, but it's been interesting because I've kind of gone from being inspired by meeting some people and then creating some small stuff at home. And
this sounds like a perfect segue and opportunity to describe sort of like the original founding of Burners Without Borders for the listeners who aren't familiar.
Yeah.
So it was, Hurricane Katrina was the year before your first burn.
Yes. Yeah,
right.
2005.
So how did that come to be? After the burn, long story short, the burn ends, and that's when Katrina had hit?
No, I mean, it's during Burning Man.
Okay.
And I think that what's interesting about that time is that, right, like, cell phones don't really work on Playa in 2005. The internet is not so much there. Social media is a brand new thing. I think like 2005 is like when Facebook maybe went public beyond college students.
Right, before they ruined Burning Man.
Yeah, and so, you have this interesting kind of thing going on, and then Katrina hits, and the news comes into the city, and it travels organically through the city, and all of a sudden people realize that their friends and their family and their camp members might not be going back to the places they had left, especially if they're from New Orleans. And so there was this instinctual and immediate need. And a bunch of people started organizing in different ways. Some people started getting satellite phones so that people could call home and see what was going on. Some people were gathering cash in like water buckets for donations. What's his name? Reverend Billy. You can see him on YouTube. He did a big impassioned speech about how this was our time to kind of like take our skills to the world. And so as the event was ramping up, all of these things were being gathered. And certain people decided to leave from the event and head straight down there. And they went down to New Orleans, and they were turned away by everybody because they were these spontaneous disaster volunteers, SDVs, and they were from Burning Man, and it was dusty. But they found this town outside of New Orleans called Biloxi, and a bunch of people who had gone down there were from the temple. And it was this Buddhist temple that had been destroyed and had just recently been opened. And so the temple crew found this kind of affinity with the temple. And that was where the shop was first kind of set up. And they built a dome, and they started doing resource distribution from the dome. And then...
how long after the burn was that when that was happening? Do you know?
I mean, this is in a matter of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, this is within a matter of weeks.
And was Biloxi like a town that wasn't getting as much attention from the authorities?
It was. I mean, whenever a city's hit, that's kind of the epicenter, and obviously there's a huge population, but Biloxi and many towns around there were hit really hard as well. Yeah. And so it's a place that, is an untraditional crew. Maybe you're more welcome.
Yeah, but it's God. Every time I'm having one of these experiences, though, at any burn event, it looks like people are accidentally training for exactly this kind of experience.
Yeah, well, I think that's what ended up happening. Down there is, all of a sudden, a Daewoo heavy equipment manufacturer found out that people needed heavy equipment, and so that got donated. And then we found out from people that in order to qualify for their FEMA trailers, their houses had to be knocked down. And so then the heavy equipment operators started knocking down people's houses, and all of a sudden it's like, all of these skills that we're using to build the city, to build the temple, to make Burning Man. I mean, it's very one-to-one to a disaster situation. It's usually camping, it's, alternative uses of power and water, and and then it's working during the day and celebrating that work in the evening around a fire. There's something very similar about all of those things.
Absolutely. And I think also just more than anything, like that kind of burner spirit of like, all right, fuck it, let's figure this out. Like, that was one of the things that initially really connected me to the community. Like, whenever something would break or fall apart, and mind you, this is obviously not 100%, but more often than not, when I was around burners, there was this kind of like shrug and laughter. Like, okay, well, let's see how we can makeshift this. How do I MacGyver this? What do we have at our disposal? Let's just bang this into the dirt. Fuck it. Let's use rebar. Let's see if it works. And especially in a situation like that, in disaster relief, like that is a skill set that comes in extra handy because you're constantly making do with what little is available to you.
Yeah, well, and you just have what's around you, and you have the people that are around you, And to me, like, I was an artist before I went to Burning Man, but I would say that, one of the ways Burning Man really inspired me was, again, kind of this social fabric of this space where I feel like, when you're out there and there's an issue, it's nobody's job to fix it but you. Yeah. And there's like this empowerment in the citizen of the moment. And so if there's something wrong, you talk to your neighbors and you talk to the theme camp over there and you figure out how to get the stuff to fix the problem. Yeah. And so to me, that like empowerment of citizenry is really powerful. And that was like what I was able to go back home with in Chicago and start doing the WB projects I was doing there. It was all because I was like, hey, it's like we own the city. It's like, it's ours. I mean, we're paying for it in taxes. We own these roads. We own these parks. Like, we should be taking probably greater stock.
Absolutely.
This was happening on them.
Yeah, well, just even that example that you were giving right now, that sense of community, God, in so much of default world, it's super normal to have no idea who your neighbors are. Like you'll live in a place for years and years and never meet. You might like wave at somebody as you're walking in and out, but it's not like the way that I feel like the way that we used to say good old days used to be, where in communities you knew your neighbors a little bit more.
Sure.
Whereas like with today, with like technology and stuff, like people are just kind of more isolated in their homes, and there's more fear. How am I going to get fucked by this person? Is this a weird person? Is this person going to break into my home? There's all this bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at Burning Man, the thing that we are so blessed to experience is that we go in with this confidence of like, we're going to figure this out. We're going to be radically self-reliant. But if I'm missing this kind of tool and I could use this right now, I can run across the street and ask, and if they have it, they're going to hook me up. You know, and that's such an empowering experience. It's a liberating experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I think there's something to be said about the common enemy of the desert. Mm-hmm. You know, we're all fighting to survive out there, and that bonds people together in a very interesting way.
Yeah, common enemy. Yeah, that's definitely the important factor there. So, so you connect with BWV, your second year on Playa. The idea that was that excited you, of course, is what you were discussing earlier, which is like, let's take these lessons out there, let's implement them into the world. Which I can agree with you more. By the way, this is like, that's the exciting thing for me.
Yeah,
you know, Burning Man is very much. This is simply like a training ground for how we can go do better shit in the world.
All
like,
sorts of things.
Yeah. It's not the isolation thing. Like, this is where we go to get better and then go implement. So you start doing these salons. What are some of like the experiences and things that came out of that? Like, the new groups start to build around there, like new friendships are being built.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, we were building a subset of what was already happening in a larger community, and it was really around how do we as artists and creatives give back. You know, and many projects happened throughout the years, but the thing that I'm proudest of was that we built a non-for-profit in Chicago, the Bold Urban Renaissance Network, and all of the profit from our fundraisers would go to that, and then we were giving away art grants. And, you know, I wanted to kind of change the granting system a little bit because I wanted people to have a direct say in where the money was going. Instead of having kind of like some people in a room deciding where it went. And I also wanted to start focusing on like the local community outside of our own circle. And so we created a program called the Chicago Community Grant Program. Right. And it's funded through fundraisers that we throw. But, you know, we ended up creating these, again, they're salons. I'm big on salons, actually. Mm-hmm. But we do a night where we invite in 4 grassroots groups who are doing interesting work. And we invite them to do a 10-minute pitch and a 5-minute Q&A. And then we have some friends make an amazing dinner for us. And we listen to all these presentations and we eat. And we talk about what's important to us as people and as a community. And so at the end of the night, then we vote on which projects we want our non-for-profit to give the money to.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean it's really interesting stuff, you know. And these are generally small projects because the grants aren't very big; they're $1,500 or less. But things that we just find to be important with what was going on in Chicago. So like a third space that was built for women who are immigrants and teenagers on the Devon Street. And so they were building a third space, which I'm a huge fan of, not a place of work or of home, but a place where you can just be. And so kind of creating, you know, for me, it was the Artist Warehouse, but this is like another version of it for a specific culture. Or a bunch of community gardens and people working with the homeless. We've given away a bunch of grants since 2012, so I can't remember them all right now. But that's a really special thing, and we do it twice a year in Chicago, and it feels good because it's all of us coming together and looking at how do we affect the larger community we're in. And I think we're always trying to figure out how to intersect. That's not the right word. We're always trying to figure out how to interject art and creativity into those processes too. And so when these projects come up and we learn about them, it's a really great opportunity for people in our community to then get involved.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, like, I think a lot of the, for whatever reason, like the general conception that exists in the community as a whole is like Burners Without Borders is like very deeply connected to like the building part of the culture. But so much of the culture is designed around what you're describing right now, which is like the grant funding and like other ways to get active in the community. other than just like simply building and like swinging a hammer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's one of the things I'm trying to do with the narrative arc of Burners Without Borders, since I took over this position 2 years ago, is kind of expand the concept, because people are doing all sorts of things, and they have been doing all sorts of things for so many years. Right. And, some of the projects that we funded this year that were really amazing was like a project in Telluride, Colorado, where they bring kids from less privileged communities to this mine, and they teach them how to weld and how to do fire art, and they do this whole weekend-long intensive with these kids around like hard build skills, and then they do this parade and fire arts festival like 3 months later, and so then they bring all the kids back to see their art amongst all these other artists and stuff, and like that's a really amazing program, teaching kids about building skills, in doing education, in artists kind of interacting with community. Right. I love that one. There's people in our community who are building maker spaces in Nepal, and there's people in our community who are trying to provide emergency housing to people who lost their homes after the earthquake in Mexico. And there's certain people, like one of the groups that we collaborate with is this group called the Permaculture Action Network. And they have, with Burning Man events and also just concerts and other artists, they've gone around and they do these action days before or after shows. And so they're playing with this idea of taking this massive amount of energy that comes to a show. Like the Polish ambassador, he was part of this, and so all these people come to the show, and then what do they do afterwards? And so the next day, they'd all get together. Yeah, I mean, well, you can do that, or all these people can get together and do like a month's worth of work on a local farm. And like kind of like get into the dirt in the local community, because a lot of these people are coming in for these shows, and so it's just an interesting idea to like harness that.
Well, it's triggering. It's being able to kind of like take that flow wave that's happening, that positive energy, that excitement, and direct it somewhere.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's like, again, like playing with all these skills and not necessarily making them so serious, but learning how to do worm composting bins, or playing with mycelium, or planting stuff. Like some people have never had a chance to learn those things. And so how do you know if that's your thing unless you have an opportunity to go and try it? And I think that what's so great about doing these type of events is some people come and a bunch of work gets done, but some people's lives are changed because they figure out that that's their future business or that's their career.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't know what you're really into until you actually like get your hands dirty a little bit.
Yeah.
So at the time that you were introduced to Burners Without Borders, that second year at Burning Man, where were a lot of the people from that camp from?
At that point, I mean, kind of all over, but the original chunk of the camp was definitely people who had been involved in Hurricane Katrina. Yeah.
I mean, like, what cities were they based out of? Do you know? Is this all spread out?
Yeah, I mean, there were people from Seattle and New Jersey and Chicago and Sacramento, all over.
So at that time, like, how did the name Burners Without Borders come together? Where did that name come from?
I wasn't there for that story, so I don't know if I can recount it in its absolute truthfulness. But what I remember about that story is that it was kind of said in jest, but it stuck, and that's a thing that
it's kind of sticky.
It is. It's sticky, and it sounds good, and also it's like there's this really interesting thing where moving through the world as an individual is sometimes very hard to get access to things, but if you're behind a label or a concept or an organization, then that's what we were finding we would need doing some of this work, is we needed the heft of an organization. And that's really how this organization has supported so many people along the years, is, Burners Without Borders is all of these amazing burners from all over who want to give their time and their passions and their love to do this thing. And for, sometimes it's under the label and sometimes it's something we're partnering with. And for some reason, and there's many, it's that opportunity to collaborate with other burners or get access to the volunteer networks or the communication or even just being part of the history.
Right.
Like that was the thing I found in Chicago, right? If I went into the mayor's office and I said, hey, I'm Christopher, I want to do this thing, they'd be like, oh, that's nice, Christopher,
How did security allow this guy in?
Yeah, but if I go in and I'm like, hey, I'm a project lead from Burners Without Borders. We have
Right.
10 years of experience in international disaster relief and community resiliency projects. It's like the weight of our community's good work
Right.
is following behind me at that point. And that's a really powerful tool.
Absolutely. That's everything.
Yeah.
I want to get some like clarity on sort of like some of this structure and hierarchy and sort of like where it was at that time and what we're working on today.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, were there a bunch of different chapters, or was it just sort of like that main Burners Without Borders camp that everybody was kind of associated with?
Well, I mean, yeah, in the beginning it was the group that went down to Katrina,
Right.
and I think that different people went home and were excited about it in different ideas, and like the idea of BWB chapters isn't something that kind of happened until much later, but
Right.
The Seattle community and the San Diego community were both communities that were super interested in BWB early on, and
Right.
they started throwing fundraisers and donating that money to BWB, and that's how we started to be able to do our community grant program.
Right. And so when you were in Chicago, it's like that wasn't like, okay, now we're BWB Chicago. It was just like all kind of BWB at that time.
We were figuring it out,
Right, right.
We
still are technically.
Yeah, we are, but and we were playing with an idea.
Yeah.
And it has been decentralized for a very long time,
Right.
and the central group of it, we're really small in a lot of ways. There's not a whole lot of meat in there. It really is all of these people coming together to collaborate, and I think that. Sometimes we lead things from the center, but just as often what we want to do is see what our community is doing really amazingly in the world and figure out how to support them in what they're doing better to the best of our ability.
Do you know about what point the decentralization started to happen? Like the different chapters started popping up in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's all, I guess, in kind of the 2007 to 9 time period. That's when it started. I started playing in Chicago. Like I said, there were people playing up in Seattle and San Diego. Someone started playing in Detroit.
Were people like setting up their own nonprofits, or were they just kind of calling it that but still donating the money into?
Yeah, no, I mean, not yet, and I think that's only something that we're kind of getting to right now. And,
Right.
Like, I guess a way I feel like I could answer that earlier question is like, it was a very organic beast for much of its existence. And
Right.
I think that a lot of that is owed to the amazing leadership that it used to have with Tom Price in the beginning and Carmen Mock, who was our executive director for 10 years. I mean, they're both amazing people. And they were kind of pushing this thing and seeing what could be created out of it. And so part of the quick history is we always were outside of Burning Man, though we were being supported by them. But then once Burning Man Project started, we started having conversations about what it would look like to bring Burners Without Borders into Burning Man Project and really help it fulfill part of its civic engagement mission.
Right. And so the Burning Man Project, I'm assuming, approached BWB and kind of like brought people together to have a conversation. Like, how did this conversation happen? What did it look like?
Well, I mean, it's like the person who is the ED for Burners Without Borders was being contracted by Burning Man and had helped start BMIR. And so, I mean, Marion went down to Katrina, and so did a bunch of other people like Will Chase and Andy Grace. And, so, I mean, it was all very tied together in the beginning. They were always growing in tandem, though they weren't organizationally the same thing, because it didn't make sense when Burning Man was an LLC.
Yeah. And so when the Burning Man Project happened, like, what was it that going, I don't know, for lack of a better description, going legit, like what sort of like energy did that bring to the Burners Without Borders movement to be able to connect more on I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah,
like,
well, I mean, we were legit before. We were a California for Benefit Corporation, and we were fiscally sponsored by the Black Rock Arts Foundation for a long time. And then towards the end, we also did a fiscal sponsorship with Burning Man. So again, it's always been tied together. But I mean, I think that it was a phase change. It was our 10-year anniversary, and Carmen stepped down as the ED, and I came in to fulfill that position. And so it was like this handoff in a lot of ways. And I think for me, a lot of what I was trying to bring to it was a new narrative and a more flushed out system of engagement so that it can decentralize even more. It kind of sounds funny in a way because it's like you almost have to centralize to decentralize.
Sure.
But, for me, it's really about looking at like, how do we tie all the people in this network together, set up a system that supports us, but also protects us? Because that's a big thing about it too. As much as I hate the legal system and liability and insurance is also very real. And so we need to think about those things too, especially when we're doing community work and sometimes things that are dangerous. And I mean, this is the burner conflict in so many ways with big artists too. It's like, at a certain point, what do I need to make sure that we're all safe?
Right.
And so that's kind of what we're really doing with Burners Without Borders now, is architecting a system so that ideally more and more people can get involved.
Right. No, because it sounds like what you're describing, correct me if I'm misunderstanding here, you're almost like, if it's like a football game, like you're trying to have a huddle.
Yeah.
Like, let's get everybody together, like, let's talk, like, no, we want you guys to do what you're doing, we want you to do more of what you're doing, but let's get on the same page on how we can do this so we're not stepping on, on everybody's protected, we're able to do more, we're not doubling up efforts, we're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot of what you're working on right now, it sounds like.
It is, and I mean, there's a bunch of amazing people. The number is a little squishy because we're trying to exactly define what a chapter is of BWB and what's a working group, which is something you develop on your way to do it. And it's all because there has to be some type of structure behind it, basically.
Can you describe those levels?
Yeah, well, okay, so there's what I call the engagement mechanisms of Burners Without Borders. And so at the bottom, you have volunteers. Uh-huh. These are people who just want to get involved.
Yeah.
And then you have, above that, you have project leads. And so these are people who say, hey, I want to do this thing. And you can make a BWB project. You have access to certain types of resources. Above that, if a person or a local area continues to engage and does work and we form a relationship, then we can license them our IP and they can become Burners Without Borders Chicago or Seattle or Corpus Christi or whatever it is. And so that's what a chapter is. But kind of in between the project and the chapter, because you have to have some certain stuff set up, there's a thing called a working group. And again, this is about me trying to figure out how to optimize letting everyone play, but also keeping things protected. And so if you just want to kind of like loosely talk about things and kind of create a community around it, you're then able to create, communication channels and stuff called a working group. And so it's kind of like a stepping stone to becoming a chapter. And right now we have chapters, all over the world. Most of it's in North America, mostly the US, but there's a new one that's formed in Mexico this year. There's 2 in Canada. There's 3 in Australia. And there's like a small kind of group of pan-European. And so there's all these people, around 31 or so, who are all doing their own experiments of what does it mean to create communities around social impact and civic engagement.
Yeah. And they get to like put in some practice and kind of like get organized, and you're getting more ideas about how this structure can work together. Like, because it almost sounds like, it's interesting. Like, there's a quote that a lot of times like my mind goes back to, which is a man who stands for everything stands for nothing.
Sure.
Like, you need to have some level of, one needs to have some sort of structure so that, again, like we're being more efficient, right? And it's always this like dance that I feel like a lot of leadership, especially in a community like Burning Man, has to engage in so that it's beneficial to everybody in the best way possible, where, because priority is radical inclusion. Like, yeah, you want to get involved, you want to work, let's get together, let's do this. However, if everybody's running around kind of doing whatever they want, then we're not being the most efficient us that we can be. We're not like focusing the energy of this unit in the best way possible.
Sure. Well, I mean, and I think like what you're stepping into is like part of the burner quandary, which is how do you have a vision, but how do you also allow for experimentation and then also the chaos, and that triangulation of the healthy space in there is like, it's hard to do as a leader. And it, I think most of us who do projects with people, we kind of struggle with like how to keep all of those points active, I mean, because to me, it's like, yeah, sometimes I get so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, what happens if we could get all of the thinkers and builders and doers of Burning Man to focus on something? I mean, like when I look at the expansiveness of the city at night, I mean, that's when I'm like, wow, banded together, we could do anything, you get that feeling. But at the same time, like, who am I or who is anybody to say this is what the culture is about, you know? Like, that's also the antithesis of it. And so it's like, also, that's again the play and the experimentation. And to me, Burning Man represents this place which has not only a permission engine, but also a permission to fail.
Yeah.
You know? And like, if your project doesn't work at Burning Man, that doesn't mean you failed. It honestly, well, it could mean a lot of things, but one of the things it might mean is that you're hitting the boundaries of what we know how to do.
Right.
And that's super cool. And sometimes you're hitting the bounds of what your social structure can do, and sometimes it's the physical or the technology. You know, and again, Burners Without Borders is just these people experimenting with this stuff with other communities in the world. Yeah. So,
at what point did this become like the official job for you? Getting hired by, I mean.
Yeah, two years ago, in 2015,
right.
I became a full-time employee. Yeah, you know, I'd done some contract work for Burning Man before that. I was actually on the board of Burners Without Borders for like 4 years. I was the president of the board, and a big part of what I did in those last 2 years was, you know, be part of those conversations with Burning Man about what does it mean to combine these ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
And then so you get into it, and like, I imagine you guys already sort of had like a plan of like the direction that you're going in, or did you like kind of come in and be like, all right, let's have some meetings, let's ask some more questions? Like, what was priority one? What were the things that you were focused on?
I mean, it's a combination of both knowing what to do, but also setting new direction. You know, and I think what's fun but also difficult about like how I see the role that I've been playing it so far is like I'm trying to keep the boat running while also trying to re-architect a lot of the driving mechanisms. And so it's like, how do we sail but also rebuild at the same time? Right. You know, and I think like what you had said earlier too, that Burners Without Borders is so tied in with this idea of building and disaster relief. And like, I never want that to not be a part of it, but I'm also super interested in how burners, again, innovate and experiment and make, and how can we look at Burners Without Borders as like a research and development space. Right. And so how do we use this platform to bring together interesting minds, resources, opportunities, theme camps, art cars to come together and really build some interesting things in the world, you know? Like, our community is so plugged in to some of the most interesting things I think that's going on in the world. And yeah, some of that has to do with like technology and Tesla and Google, but some of it has to do with, you know, like people going out in the field and building new ways of interacting. And so there's an organization that we work with really closely called Communitaire. Yeah. And bunch of burners on the board, burner executive director, and they build these resource centers in countries post-disaster and provide long-term relief, really based around education, access to tools, and bringing people together on a peer-to-peer level. And so it's like super burnery, and it's really changing how people look at things. I don't know if you ever knew about Free Space either, but do you know Free Space?
I don't.
Okay, well, so Free Space...
You know what? Yes, I do. Tell the listeners.
Okay. Free Space was an experiment that started in San Francisco by a bunch of people, but the person who's really kind of led it is Mike Zuckerman, and he had this idea of getting a space in San Francisco, renting it for $1 a month, and not making a maker space, but a free space. And so whoever comes in can decide what happens there.
Right.
You know, and so it was a really interesting idea. People loved it. There were all these problems because when you're radically inclusive on a street in San Francisco in the market, you're getting really interesting people. Yeah. But now the idea of free space is something that has been replicated in all different sorts of countries and places, and everyone does it differently, but they're all really interesting. And now Mike has been playing with what does it look like to do kind of these type of organizational principles with refugee communities in Greece and Uganda. And so that's really fascinating, you know? And so to me, I don't know, like there's so much opportunity. And so for me, that's what I'm trying to have Burners Without Borders provide in the future is I really do look at it like how could we use it as an incubator and an R&D space to innovate some new ideas for challenges that we're facing in the world.
Yeah, I think that the radical inclusion part of the story that you were just telling, because I kept thinking and bouncing back to earlier, we were talking about the kind of art that attracted you, and just dealing with a lot of different artists means you're dealing with a lot of different interesting personalities.
Yeah.
And everybody's passionate, and everybody's really into different things. would you say this is like your earlier artistic experience, like really influenced the way that you interact with these people and how you navigate and how you're able to coordinate these kind of personalities together?
Definitely. I mean, I still think of myself as an artist, even though I might not have time to like build the things I used to be able to build. But, I call a lot of what I do social sculpture now. And so it's like, how do you give people the right tools, framework, sometimes questions, to architect solutions? And to me, that's what's really interesting. And like, to me, that's what's happening with the BWB chapters. I mean, they're doing it on their own already. I don't have to teach them anything, but how can I kind of like pull the lessons of what's happening there with them and then give that as a toolkit to people who want to do it in the future? That's what's happening with these BWB projects, like this really interesting project that's being worked on right now that was just like, super interesting and innovative was all the fires happened up in Northern California after Burning Man. And a camp had reached out to us called Camp Epic, who I think is mainly based in LA. And they have all of these 40-foot containers that they've modded out for living structures, kitchens, showers. They're able to fit a lot of people in a super small amount of space by stacking them at Burning Man. It's really interesting. And they wanted to donate those containers to us for hurricane relief in Texas, but it was too expensive. And
to ship them over there?
To ship them over. It was like $2 a mile. It didn't make sense.
Right.
But then as soon as the fires happened, and all of a sudden all their stuff was in Reno, it's like it's way closer from Reno to Santa Rosa. And so, a partnership started, and everyone started cleaning out the containers, and we've been able to bring 7 of those containers up to Santa Rosa, and we're going to be able to provide emergency housing for 85 people. Yeah. And the idea is not to charge people a dime, and that people who need help in those situations because they've lost their home, and we're prioritizing teachers, students with special needs, relief workers. It's like those people need to save the money they're making doing their job so that they can figure out what their next housing situation is. And so that's a really interesting way, like a theme camp is able to kind of like show up with infrastructure that's already built, that's sitting in a lot in Reno, and immediately make it useful.
And utilize it, Because it's almost like if we can conceptually detach from the idea that an incubator or a build space has to be a physical place, if we can detach from that idea, it's almost like the Burning Man community and culture is the incubator and the build space. And what Burners Without Borders is able to do is to take those ideas and actually be the hand that places them out in the real world.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm totally comfortable playing different roles. Sometimes we're the one placing it out there, and a lot of times we're just amplifying the message, and that's, I really see that, like, again, what my role is I feel kind of like a government employee in my role. It's like, it feels, it's a huge honor, but it also feels strange to, like, lead something like Burners Without Borders, where really it's an army of people out there who are doing all of this work. And so I really have this supreme honor of like helping figure out what our path is by listening and constructing. I kind of lost the question there.
No.
For a second. But that's really kind of like what I see my role as. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And so sometimes there's projects that just happen by their own. Another really interesting project that happened after Burning Man this year was a bunch of the guys who are involved with the foam. What was it called? Foam Nation this year.
Oh, Transformation?
Transformation. They change it every year.
Yeah.
Dr. Bronner's, Transformation, Abraxas. They took their kitchen from Playa and went all the way to Florida.
Wow.
And brought it and set up an emergency kitchen and fed people who'd been affected by the hurricane. And then a bunch of the people in Burning Man, Florida, who were kind of rallying under BWB Florida, all of a sudden showed up and started volunteering there. And they were able to serve, I think, 30,000 meals to people who needed it. And then there was a burner named Alon who had come down there, I think because he had family, and he had gotten involved with that. And then he wanted to stay. And so he just is finishing up a project where he's building a playground for that community. And it's called Play Makali. And, he wanted to like kind of leave this memento of this, these burners and this community coming together and sharing something. And so it's really interesting how all these projects kind of link together, and some of them we're involved with, and some of them we're just trying to help other people see what's going on in our community so they can get involved.
Yeah.
And so the organization that brought that kitchen was called Grassroots Alliance. Yeah.
God, there's so many different things. Like, does it ever get overwhelming for you?
It does. I mean, like for me, that's actually one of the hardest parts of what I feel like I do is that there's just a lot of information. And you know, obviously today we have a lot of different mediums in which that information comes in. And so it is difficult for me to kind of like parse it and use it all adequately.
How do you do it? I mean, literally, I'm asking like tech notes. Like, are you keeping track in an Excel sheet? Like, is it program general project management approach?
Oh man,
what's the way that you do it in your brain?
It's a whole bunch of it, you know. It's using Asana, it's using Slack, it's using emails and phone calls, and you know, it's kind of a mess because people connect in all these different ways.
Right.
But that's part of the fun, I guess, too.
Yeah, some people want a text message. Some people want just even texting with the Rebel, producer of this show, Burners Without Borders LA. Like, I'll text him and he'll respond on Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
And then I'll respond to him on Facebook Messenger and he'll send me a text. And I'm like trying to figure out which one to respond.
Yeah, when you get all the information starts getting crossfired. Yeah. Well, and so I'll tell you, you know, like the thing I probably struggle with in this role and that I'm learning about through it is like, again, going back to that, like how much should it be your own vision? How much of it is this collaborative approach? And I'm really trying to like straddle the difference between those. But then also sometimes I have these passion projects that I really want to do. And one of the ones that I worked on with my camp, as well as a bunch of other people, was 2 years ago. I was in a refugee camp in France, in the jungle in Calais. I was visiting a bunch of burners from the UK who were out there. There were a bunch of them from the UK who were all burners doing activation, and we were giving them a grant to replace some tools that had been stolen. And so I went up there with this awesome burner from Italy named Sarah, and this other burner from Finland named Andy, and we took a trip up there, and it was a really powerful, interesting experience, you know. And I think even going back to the Gypsy Bus story, right? I'm super interested in community. I'm super interested in how people band together, and being in this camp was a really eye-opening experience. Just seeing what it was like for 7,000 people who'd all smuggled themselves across the European continent to the shore in France, just trying to get in to England, and to see how people were living and to see how people were organizing and how people were creating commercial districts and building amazing things in there, you know?
In a refugee camp.
Yeah, and building salons, and the chairs are made out of like 1x1s and cardboard that's stapled to it. But, you know, they have a bathhouse, they have a church, they have tea houses, you know, they build all of these things. And just, I'm so fascinated in how people organize living in these liminal zones. And obviously a refugee camp in Black Rock City are nothing alike, and yet the physical conditions under which they're built have these interesting similarities. And so to me, that was like this aha moment, and I came back from that trip and I wanted to create a mobile makerspace that could be used in various contexts like this. And so we created this thing called the Mobile Resource Unit, the MRU. And that's like one of the kind of R&D things that we're playing with Burners Without Borders right now. And so we've created this thing, and it has all the tools you need in it: a metal shop, a wood shop, rapid prototyping, 3D printer, laser cutter, hand tools, electronic tools, sewing machine, grometer. And, you know, the idea is that we could drop this into any community. And again, people have the access to tools. Because that was the thing that was happening to me in this camp, was as I'm building out this youth center with these guys, like everyone wants to borrow the hammer, the drill, the saw. And I was like, of course, these people already know how to fix their own stuff. And what you don't smuggle with you is tools, you know, it's heavy. And so then you're in this place and you're trying to survive. And so how do you prototype? How do you fix things? How do you, like, you know, do all of that? And so to me, it was really this aha of like tools and the space to use tools. And what's cool too is, like, you know, it's starting to replicate, and like this is where it becomes really interesting to me. BWB Florida is building 3, and BWB Corpus Christi is building 1, and so we're going to have 5 of these. And so all of a sudden we're going to have 5 iterations of this model, and they're going to be placed around the U.S. And so next time something happens, you know, we can activate that resource in a space.
The immediate thing that it makes me think about, which I spent a good amount of time in that MOU on Playa this year. The immediate thing it makes me think about is that the biggest pain in the ass with tools is that people were like, grab a hammer and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Like, do you have a system that you've developed on how to keep track of those things?
Well, I mean, we have systems we're working on, and that's why Black Rock City is such a great place to experiment, because it's a pretty safe community to try things out with, you know, and it depends what you're taking, you know, like if it's a bigger thing, then we'll take an ID or something of value and we'll have you sign it out and tell us what camp you're in, you know, and so we have a sign out system that we utilize, and, you know, we try to get better with how we organize and use visual cues like shapes around tools or certain color codes for things.
Yeah.
But, you know, that is a hard part of it. And I think that, you know, one of the things we've realized is like the attrition of things is part of the upkeep of this.
So in the position that you're in, when you come up with like an idea like this from, you know, you went on the trip, you came up with the idea, you come back, you're like, this is something we should implement or at least experiment with, like be in beta testing on. Do you pitch that up the chain, or are you able to just pull the trigger and say we're doing this?
Well, you know, I did that project, I think like any other project lead kind of would have. I mean, I had a little bit more access to maybe some things, but really, you know, at the end of the day, it was the BWB Black Rock City camp that really put that container together. Right. And the camp is a different beast than the organization. The camp is really built by the members in it. And so a lot of the original funding came from people in the camp saying that they were willing to put some stuff into it, you know, and then also having amazing people in our community gift us things. And so we got our container gifted to us from a theme camp called Ideate that had a non-for-profit called Reallocate that was involved. And so they gifted us the container. Yeah. And then the Gate, which was a makerspace in San Leandro, hosted it for us for a year for free, you know, and like the 3D printer company has burners who worked for it. And so they ended up giving it to us. And so we put together kind of a toolkit of how to do it, but we really did it, you know, in a very grassroots burner focused way. And then once the prototype was successful, then I was able to kind of pitch it a little bit more. And so now we have some resources from the organization, but, you know, I've also been writing grants on the side to be able to kind of promote this idea.
Does the camp almost serve as like a good like testing ground for some things that eventually can make their way into the BWB program, if you will?
Sure, it can if that's what people want to use it for, you know. And I mean, the makerspace I think is a great idea. You know, for me, the camp is really a physical manifestation of kind of who we're trying to be all year round, and so we are very education focused with our speaker series in the makerspace, but we also try to be artistic, and we have a live screen printing project, and we host a lot of performances and musicians. Right. We have an art car that's a solar powered mobile stage called SolarBeatz, and they do education in the Midwest with their solar powered car about environmentalism and sustainability.
Is there are there any divisions between the kinds of things that you can do at the camp and or BWB as a program?
Say that again?
It's a strange question. Like, is there a certain thing that you can experiment with or play with, or are there any divisions? And the reason I'm asking, like, there are, I don't know, we recently did like a Camp Walter episode, for example. Yeah. And like the way that Walter Productions approaches like their actual business versus what they do on Playa, like there is a division between the kinds of things. Like, you know, they're not going to pay employees that are on Playa. Sure. Versus like when they're at a for-profit event in the default and it's not Walter the Camp, they have employees that are getting paid. Yeah. I wonder if there are any things that are, you know, like, oh, you know what, we could do this in the camp, but we can't really do this at BWB as a program, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more subtle than that. I mean, they are different operations, you know, and the idea is that, you know, I think with camp and really, you know, again, I'm like the second wave camp director, but like, you know, for me, camp is supposed to, again, be this physical manifestation. So I'm trying to create this certain feeling, and that's a project that's being built by the people in it. Yeah. And that is very different than the programmatic expression of it. You know, it's hard. It's all so intertwined, and yet it's also very different. Just like each of the BWB chapters is also different. It's, you know, they're all doing their own thing. They have a lot of independence in what they do. And yet we're all building this same thing together.
Right. You cross each bridge as you get to
it. You know, like to me, what's so cool about BWB is that BWB is both hyper-local and global at the same time. Yeah. You know, and it exists in those two spaces.
Yeah. Well, it's the same way that you see the things. Like, you're able to see sort of like the larger vision, but you can also focus on that nail and that hammer. God damn, you're working like a lot. I mean, you're like on Playa, you're a camp lead.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the year you're working, in your position with Burning Man. Like, are you ever not working? Like, fuck. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And, honestly, in this past year, I've thought more about what I want in the ways of work-life balance.
Yeah.
And I think in our world, it's kind of like work-life burner balance, because you also have that world, which is both work and play all at the same time. And so that's one of the things I am trying to figure out, being super honest, like I've overwhelmed myself and I definitely have hit some walls along the way. And so how do I keep on doing all this work and yet at the same time take care of myself better? I think that's something that I am very focused on right now.
Yeah.
So, and also I want to be an artist too.
Right.
So that's part of it.
I was going to say, you must be missing some of that filmmaking and video work you were doing before.
I do, and I used to build some sculptures for other events and stuff, and those were always really beautiful experiences.
Yeah.
So I do miss that, but I also, like, for me, the position I have with Burners Without Borders, like, I think I said that before, I feel like a government employee, and part of what I mean by that too is I feel that I'm in service right now, and I'm very consciously choosing to be in service to the community in this way, and this isn't the thing I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because I don't think it's meant to be that. I think that there's somebody or somebodies who are going to take this idea on and invigorate it again. And to me, what I'm trying to do in my entire role is set up a system that someone else can take over, and they're like, wow, okay, I get how this works. The levers, boom, 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 and then they can take it to that next level, or hopefully all the people who get to engage in it get to take it to that next level, And just to tell you one other great project, because like I think our community is so cool, right? So this guy named Will, he's from Santa Cruz, and he was in Kenya, and he's a fire spinner, and he started to notice that a lot of these kids who lived on the street loved to watch him spin fire, and somewhere along the way he came up with this idea, because all these kids are huffing a lot. So they're like running around with bottles and huffing, and he's like, it's not good. These kids are on this. And so he comes up with this idea of asking the kids if they want to learn how to spin poi.
Yeah.
And of course the kids are interested. And so he's like, all right, let's take your huff bottle, let's fill it with dirt, and then let's put some string on there and let's do lessons. And there's no judgment in what he's trying to do. All these kids are trying to learn this circus skill, and I think a lot of kids too start to figure out that if they're altered or fucked up, and you try to spin poi, you're probably going to hit yourself in some sensitive areas, and so they're like, there's this learning through the art. And then eventually, as they got better, he'd be like, all right, do you guys want to learn how to do this on fire?
Yeah. And
the kids who said, yeah, he goes, great. And he goes, there's no judgment in your lifestyle, but if I'm going to teach you fire, you need to be sober for these lessons, because you got to respect fire.
Yeah.
And so then he'd take these kids into a deeper level of learning how to do this on fire, and it became this thing about respect. And all of a sudden, there are all of these street orphans who now have a skill that they can practice and they can do, and they can go to bars and restaurants and they can make money doing performance. And that's like such a simple way that a guy with an art project is able to kind of think about how to engage with a local community. And I very much believe change people's lives through just the sharing of this knowledge.
Sure. No, that's such an incredible program, because it's we as human beings really are a collection of our habits and our rituals in one way or another. And the biggest mistake a lot of people make is that when they're trying to quit in my opinion, a less than ideal habit, a habit that may be affecting them not in the best way, they try to just like quit that habit and dominate it. And what I've observed and experienced is that the most successful way to do that is to develop a new habit that's better, that kind of forces that other one to go away little by little. Like, I quit smoking because I got into running.
Yeah.
And after like a year of doing that, I started to hit a wall where I would just like cough and I couldn't get past a certain level, and my body could keep going, but my lungs were giving out.
Yeah.
So I was like, I like the dopamine that I'm getting from this a little bit more than I was getting for the other one. Might as well quit the other one now.
Yeah.
And that approach that you're describing, without judgment, bringing people a new thing, like, look, isn't this more fun than that other thing? That's really incredible. That is like absolutely the burner spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I like the term cultural first responders. And I think that's sometimes what we might be able to do as burners really well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's something we've talked about a lot on the show too. Is like it's a lot of what's happening in the Burning Man community is very much at the forefront of what's happening in the rest of society.
Yeah.
We're at the cutting edge of it. A lot of the things that have been happening in the burner community for a while now, eventually like they trickle their way into mainstream. Like the conversation about consent, that was happening in our circles for a while, and now it's finally like made its way more into the mainstream topic conversation.
Interesting.
Really,
I hadn't thought about that in the case of consent, but I could see that.
Oh yeah, because we're used to it. We live in our bubble of awesome people that are normally saying, "How can we do this?" I think just even a lot of things like seeing building and making is a fun thing. You know, that's something that we've seen a lot in the burner community. I see a lot of things like relationships, the way that you can approach relationships. Conversations about them, monogamy, technology, design, a lot of this stuff, we're playing with it and we're experimenting with it.
Experimenting with the edges.
And then it eventually makes its way out into what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, I think that, in the world of celebration and festival and carnival, again, it's a place where you're allowed to break the rules. And when you're allowed to break the rules, you're playing. And again, that's where all these experiments and prototypes come from.
I loved this story. So this year, I think I told this on an earlier episode. This year on Playa is when Harvey hit Texas, Hurricane Harvey. And I don't remember the gentleman's name. He came to BWB and he spoke.
Patrick or Parsec, probably.
Was it? Yeah, I think
he's from Corpus Christi.
Right. Was it? Yeah, because the story that he was telling is that immediately burners had activated and gotten down there, and like they set up shade structures, and he was describing that like a lot of the people in these disaster situations, the first thing that happens is usually it's the insurance adjusters that hit the ground. Because money is the most important thing people are worried about. Immediately, they're the ones that hit the ground. They want to know who's paying for what.
Yep.
Where's these things falling?
And what's the damage?
Right. And they're walking around. They stumble across the burner camp that's like set up shade structure. The guys have already set up tools and work tables and benches, and they're having some beers, I guess. And they're like, "How are you guys here already? Nobody else is here. Red Cross isn't here yet. Like you guys are first people we've run into.
Yeah.
And you've already established, and that comes as the direct result of having created a positive and enjoyable environment around that experience, building community around it. They're like, all right. And he was describing, he's like, we're going to have our decom right there. We're going to build, we're going to bust our ass, we're going to have an amazing time having this experience because you're not getting as much done if you're having a miserable time, if you're hating it.
Sure.
If you're enjoying it, you're having fun, you're getting that energy, that positive energy, you have the community around you, and then afterwards you can, have a few beers and have your decom right there. You're going to get out there.
Well, things have to be fun, right?
Yeah.
If it's not fun, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we bring to all different sorts of work that we do that's really unique.
Yeah. What is the biggest challenge that you've faced that was the most unexpected challenge when you took on this job?
Well, I mean, it's building this thing, or whatever I'm doing, co-building this thing with everybody. It's, we have limited resources. And I think that's, I think whenever you talk to any sort of artist, right, like that ends up being one of the hardest things, and so,
did you think you would be able to do more faster or?
Well, I always want to move faster and harder, but things do take time, and working through Burning Man's infrastructure is, it's an interesting pace, and Burning Man is very protective of itself. And I think it had to be. That's how it grew up. It grew up in a very harsh world, and it's done an amazing job of not falling prey to all of the things that I think could have fallen that organization. And it's difficult. It's really difficult, I think, to run that event and to steward the community in the way that organization does. And so working through it, it's interesting. It's again, this space between vision and chaos.
Right.
And so things aren't always fast. And, like, how do we support our community doing this type of work out in the world? It's like everyone needs to pay the rent. And so, if people are not only being involved in Burning Man or their camps, but they're also getting involved in their local communities, it's like, how do we support people? That's hard. And I think that's one thing that a lot of team leads come back. And it's just like artists after a while. They're like, man, I want to do this, but how? And we're all trying to figure that out together. And so that's just kind of the struggle, I think, is, like, if we only have so much manpower and so many resources, like, how do we support such a diverse community as ours?
I imagine that involves making a lot of very difficult decisions, and then as a leader, the job really is. I don't know, as a leader, it's not. It's almost like your job is not to always make the perfect decision, because that's just impossible.
Yeah.
But as a leader, it's the burden of leadership. Like, you're gonna take that burden on. That we're gonna make a decision. It might not be perfect, but we got to move forward, and there's no other way.
Well, and I'm hoping, too, that, because I know that I'm not always going to do stuff right, but I'm hoping that I can admit when I don't, and to me, that's a big part of, leadership, is admitting. It's like, I don't always know, and I'm going to try to include people in as much as I can, but I'm not always going to do a good job of it, and that's why I think that BWB as a whole, or just even the camp, is an interesting experiment, because how do you bring all these people together to do something as that sum of our greater whole?
Yeah. What do you know this year about how to execute and be a better leader, and et cetera, that you didn't know 2 years ago?
Well, I think that, for me, I want to start having some interesting conversations about the future, and like, the thing I've always been interested in for a long time, back to like wanting Lakes of Fire to buy its own land. I'm like, all right, like, what if we're pouring all this energy and this money and this time in, like, what
Lakes of Fire is the Chicago regional.
Yeah, or the Great Lakes.
Great Lakes, okay.
It's a bigger area, but like, it's like we're pouring all this time and money in, like, why are we paying rent on it? And I think about that with camp too. It's like, like, how can we invest smarter? Mm-hmm. How can we invest in infrastructure that lasts and has multi-uses? And so for me, I'm trying to open up that conversation with my camp, which is, like, what do we want to do? What do we imagine we could do with this stuff? What does it mean for us to invest in ourselves, but also in this greater experiment? And so to me, that's where I want camp's vision to go.
Right. Do you have any answers now that you didn't 2 years ago?
No, I don't. And sometimes that's what's fun about it. That's not my decision. That's the place where I'm going to try and pose questions, and I'm going to try and be a facilitator. But like I said, I'm not going to be in this role forever. Yeah. So I need it to be a vision that's bigger than what I have.
Yeah.
And, who knows what's going to happen. I'm excited about Fly Ranch. Yeah. I'm excited about Burning Man being in the world more. I'm excited about the regional network growing. I'm excited about BlackRock Solar becoming BlackRock Labs and kind of making a transition into a technology incubator. Like, on a good day, what I really hope is that we're just at the beginning of kind of understanding what our true capacity is. Like, Burning Man somehow became this thing that is just seeming to grow and collect super interesting people and capabilities. So I don't know. I'm excited about what we could do. I just don't know what it is.
No, that's obvious. I mean, it's your entire body language shifts when you start to talk about ideas about the future.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, it's interesting. Like, you're an interesting character. You're obviously you've had an interesting experience. I think, in order to do what you do, you have to be the kind of person who is excited about interesting experiences. But it is interesting to see, like, the excitement that comes out of you. You start to bounce up and down in your chair,
yeah.
About what's up next.
Well, it's like you can go to the most interesting places in the world, and I guess those places are different for every person, but it's like there are burners there. It's like, like when I started engaging with refugee communities, there's burners everywhere doing interesting things. When we got called to be a part of Standing Rock, like, the reason the government there, the tribal government, asked Burning Man to get involved is because they wanted to build a city.
Right.
And when they kept on asking people who's an expert in building, a city of the future, Burning Man kept on coming up.
Yeah.
And of course there were burners there involved. And when I got to go to Nepal and be part of this thing called, it was the world's first humanitarian mini maker fair.
Yeah.
At Nepal Communautaire. And there's so many burners there working on interesting solutions. And no matter what it is, it seems like there's somebody who's involved with our community there. And so that, I just find that to be a fascinating thing.
What is the next big focus of Burners Without Borders?
Yeah, well, I mean, this winter, we're rolling out a whole bunch of new stuff. We're going to be rolling out a new website. We're going to be rolling out a new volunteer infrastructure and a new chapter network. And so that's kind of a big bulk of the work, which isn't necessarily the sexiest of stuff. And we're also winding down from a super intense, disaster-filled fall.
Yeah.
And so, there, we still have some projects that we're supporting out there. There's a guy named Edgar who's doing a project in Puerto Rico currently called Sail Relief. I just found out about this other burner named El Nino who built the giant owl this year at Burning Man.
That's a great name.
He's doing some stuff down in Puerto Rico. He's Puerto Rican. And so we're going to be continuing to engage, and I guess we're just going to see what the community brings us. We'll be launching our grant programs in the early spring, and we'll figure it out.
Would it be correct to say that kind of the biggest public relations challenge that BWB faces is that assumption that it's all a building thing, that there's so much more to it? I could be just projecting here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's the biggest PR problem we have. But yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things, like I said, I'm really trying to do is shift that narrative.
Yeah.
And to me, if there's two foundational beliefs that everything is kind of revolving around, one is that, there will never be enough government programs or not-for-profits in the world to fix what's going on.
Right.
And so we just need to empower everyday people to get involved.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do at a very base minimum. And then the other thing that I think is a foundational belief for us is that, people have the inherent capacity to thrive, and social transformation is within reach of all communities. And so for me, that's a big part of what we're trying to do too, I think, is really kind of talk about how do you bring community together to figure out their own solutions? How do you do human-centered design work so that communities are not only getting fixes, but creating those fixes, because that's what long-term management of things looks like. And I think that's what the disaster and humanitarian world has already figured out. It's when you plop in solutions, a lot of times they cause new problems that you didn't expect, and they're hard to maintain.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's not about plopping things in as many places, but building things from the grassroots up.
I had a friend of mine, on that note, had asked, it was almost this exact sentence that I'm about to read to you. She said, I'm a lesbian anarchist who wants to build homes, but I'd rather not build it for that Catholic organization. So there is this sense Habitat for Humanity, for example, they do great work.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of people ask, what if, I want to go and do that kind of work, but I'd rather do it with burners. Should they look through Burners Without Borders to find if there's a program they could volunteer for, or could they put together their own team and movement and then come to Burners Without Borders and say, we'd like support and help?
Both, once we have our new website at the end of January, February, somewhere in there, it'll be way easier to see what's active. It's a little difficult right now. But yeah, I mean, we want people to create their own projects, and it's a lot like creating an art project at Burning Man, It's you gotta do the planning and figure it out, but we also have best practices. We also have people we can pair you with to get knowledge or understanding of something you might not have. And so, it's all pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps, but also it's having all of these toolkits and resources to make things go.
Okay. So you said, when is the new website launching?
Some early spring, late winter. We're within a month or two.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So by the time this podcast is live, it's probably going to be up, because it's going to go up in a month or so.
Yeah. So you can go to burnerswithoutborders.org. You can also look us up on Facebook, Burners Without Borders. You can also look up a group called BWB Volunteers Worldwide. And that's where a bunch of people who are involved in the community hang out and share projects.
Right.
And so a lot of times you just see people kind of posting what they're working on in that group. And so that's a cool place to see what's up to.
Yeah, and you can see on the website, as you're describing, like, cool, like there's all this active stuff all over the world, not just the country. So you can find something in your own city, and if something isn't necessarily there, you can pitch an idea potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we're here to help facilitate that idea.
That's
And what we're really excited about on our new website too is we're going to have a really great section with toolkits, and they're going to be all listed out by different, kind of areas of focus. And so if you don't even have an idea, but you want to get involved, you can go and check out projects that past burners have done. And they range from like super simple things from like, park cleanups to like super complicated things where there's this thing called Rod in a Box, and our friends in Chicago started now their own non-for-profit called Chedidarod, and they organize the world's largest mobile food drive every spring, and they get, I think at this point it's maybe 4,000 people or something, and there's hundreds of teams, and there's 4 dogs and a musher, and everyone's in costumes. They make art carts, and everyone's running around the city to bars doing checkpoints, and it's about shenanigans, and it's about bribery, and it's so much fun, and it's like art released in the streets. And at the same time, they've raised over 2.5 million pounds of food for local food shelves, and several hundreds of thousands of dollars that have gone to local food programs. And so like that's a really complicated version, but that's another amazing example of burners kind of taking this fun in the streets, creativity, wildness, and making an impact with it.
Yeah. Civic responsibility. That's incredible. What is next for you personally? What are you going to do? Are you excited about next year at the Burn? Do you have any art projects you want to build?
Oh, man.
What are you up to?
Well, it'll be my 3rd year running camp. And so the first year was about the infrastructure upgrade. The second year was about the social infrastructure upgrade.
We got a bar.
Well, and we had more like community things happening. Yeah. And now this 3rd year, I really want to focus on amping up the artistic infrastructure. And so how do we really bring the programming in and the vibe of what we're doing to that next level. So I'm excited about that. And there's a couple cool projects. I'm excited that in a week and a half, 2 weeks, I'm going to be headed to DC and working with some people from Burning Man headquarters, and we've been invited to participate in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Yeah. And so over 300 mayors are going to be coming together of, I believe, cities over 100,000 people, talking about all these issues that they're dealing with. And the mayor of Reno invited us to come. And so we're going to be doing a discussion about kind of lessons from Burning Man, how mayors can learn from a pop-up city. And then we're also going to be doing like some interactive kind of participatory design thinking stuff where we're going to be asking mayors to think about ideas and then create an art project that kind of comes out at the end of the event. So like I'm excited for that, and I'm excited how Burning Man's civic infrastructure as a city might be able to relate to other cities. I don't know if you know what's going on in San Jose right now, but there's all this public art in San Jose that Burning Man's been installing. It feels like there's so much going on. So I'm just super excited to watch our community.
Yeah. No, it is absolutely a tidal wave happening right now.
It's on fire.
Yeah.
Boom.
Oh, well done. Let's just end it right there, man. It's not going to get any better.
Oh, that really bad Burning Man dad joke.
Good. That was an excellent pun. I love that's perfect way to wrap it up. Breedlove, thank you so much for everything you do for the community, everything you've done. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all the sacrifices you made. You are deeply appreciated, and I like those episodes where I can easily say, I can speak for everybody when I say thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And, it really is my honor. And I love being able to tell these stories because, it just fills me up.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge honor.
Yeah, I'm going to say after you are no longer in this position, it sounds like the documentary about Burners Without Borders should be your next project.
Something, or I'm going to build some big art,
Yeah. Cool. We're looking forward to that. Thanks, man.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
So follow the sun.
All right, well, there you have it. You are now listening to the sounds of GoodSex. Sounds like, I guess, it's pretty much what GoodSex would sound like. So on Wednesday afternoon, the crew of the SolarBeatz crew, where GoodSex was hanging with, they took a ride out to the Tree of Tenere, which we've spoken about multiple times on the show, with the intention to embark on a previously scheduled art tour. When they get to the tree, they discover that a wedding is about to take place, and the wedding party asks if SolarBeatz can provide music. So GoodSex, I'm going to just go ahead and read his exact words here. GoodSex says, "We were honored to be given such a grand task by these quote-unquote strangers, or friends, as they quickly had become. I played from the heart and organically searched for music that would fit their special day. It was a really magical and wondrous experience. After that, 3 more weddings came and went, while the SolarBeatz crew and I entertained and shared in the joy of Burning Man love. I hope you can feel that energy through the music in this mix." I absolutely can, GoodSex. We're going to play about an hour of it. You can hear the rest of this set on SoundCloud, on his SoundCloud, the links to which will be at itsgoodsex.com. That's one word, itsgoodsex.com. You can learn more about SolarBeatz over at solarbeatz.com. Beats is spelled with a Z. SolarBeatz.com, the environmental sustainable art car with a mission to educate the world about environmental sustainability. Please give us a like on Facebook and join the Facebook group, and leave us a review on iTunes. It helps get the show more visibility so more of our tribe can be a part of this conversation. All the links are over at burnerpodcast.com. You can connect with me on all the social medias at Mr. Arash. That's MRARASH. I am most active on Facebook and Instagram, but you can tweet me and stuff as well. Burner Podcast is produced by Rebel Dharma along with associate producer Tori Massey, and is released on the first and third Wednesdays of the month, and is available on Stitcher, iTunes, Spreaker, iHeart Radio, TuneIn Radio, and a bunch of other places I keep accidentally running into. The show is not hard to find. We thank you, dear listeners, for all your support. Our opening theme music is America's Horse with No Name Remix, and was produced by Joman. Joman, his stuff is over at soundcloud.com/DJ Joman. So until next time, love and light and other crap. Take it away, GoodSex.
And I've never given a second thought to where the rivers flow. Telling ya, but nothing else. Oh yeah, feel like a one-track mind. Oh yeah, and I've never given up. Oh yeah. Second thought to where the rivers flow. Telling ya, but nothing else. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and I've never given a second thought to where the rivers flow.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we gotta start our morning set, our sunrise set, in about like 30 seconds. So, about 30 seconds from now, you guys gonna see the sunrise set from SolarBeatz, from Michigan, with the X. And at the end of it, it's all about the clapping. So let's.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me. Whoa, stand by me. Whoa, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, and the mountains should crumble to the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me. Whoa, stand by me. Whoa, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. telling you to close your eyes.
Some days I can't even trust myself.
It's killing me to see you this way. 'Cause though the truth may carry this, ship will carry our bodies.
It's alright walking around this open empty house.
So hold my hand, I'll walk with you, my dear.
The stars creak as you sleep, it's keeping me awake.
It's the house telling you to close your eyes. Well, tell her that I miss our little talks.
Soon it will be over and buried with our past.
We used to play outside when we were young and full of life and full of love.
Some days I don't know if I am alright.
Your mind is playing tricks on me, my dear. 'Cause though the truth may vary, this ship will carry our bodies safe to shore.
I'm on a menu today, and all the shadows, they surround me. I'm on a menu today, and I know how to serve it, I know how to serve it, yeah. Waterfall, waterfall, I'm jumping from the lights, are breaking and the spines are stabbing me. Waterfall, waterfall, I'm jumping from the lights, are breaking and the spines are stabbing me, yeah. Waterfall, waterfall, I'm jumping from the lights, are breaking and the spines are stabbing me. Waterfall, waterfall, I'm jumping from the lights, are breaking and the spikes are stabbing me. Your love
trying to be rude, but hey, pretty girl, I'm feeling you. The way you do the things you do remind me of my Lexus cool. That's why I'm all up in your grill, trying to get you to a hotel. You must be a football coach, the way you got me playing the field. Now it's like murder she wrote. Once I get you out the clothes, privacy is on the door. Still they can hear you screaming more. Girl, I'm feeling what you're feeling. No more hoping and wishing. I'm about to take my key and stick it in the ignition. Can I get a toot toot? Can I get a beep beep? Running ahead to my fro, bouncing on 24s. All they say on the radio.
burnerpodcast.com.